growing up, the idea of surrender was a bad thing. You see, I grew up with two older brothers, and playing with them was quite different than I would imagine than my girlfriends who had sisters. There was no playing Barbies, there was no playing dolls. If anything, it was them taking the heads off my dolls and placing them on my bed. And one of the games that we often played was something called Mercy. Who knows that game? It's where you grab each other's hands and you both just twist as hard as you can, and the first person to say mercy loses. And I believe that deeply ingrained, even in the American and probably just the world imagination, the idea of surrender means failure. It means to wave that white flag. It means to retreat. It means to defeat. My father also, growing up, was a history buff. There was memorabilia from history throughout our entire house, and especially the Alamo. He was obsessed with the Alamo, and to say he was obsessed, in our basement was a 14-foot wide, 8-foot tall painted mural on the wall of our basement of the Battle of the Alamo. We spent many vacations going and visiting the Alamo, and I would hear my dad tell the story of 180 men being inside the Alamo against Santa Anna, hoping to claim independence for Texas. Men like Davy Crockett and William Travis and Bowie outside, and 180 of these men inside the Alamo, while 1,500 people from Santa Anna on the outside. As they raised a red flag, symboled blood, that said, "No quarter, no terms, no mercy." This from the opponents, Santa Anna. Travis later went and wrote a letter that said, "I shall never surrender or retreat, victory or death." And he drew a line in the dirt. And it barely even took 2 hours for the 180 men to all die. Because for them, surrender meant weakness. For them, surrender meant failure. And so they did not surrender. And from then on, the battle cry, "Remember the Alamo," was carried on throughout centuries, which meant never surrender. And I think ingrained in our minds, in the way that we grow up and we learn about history and the way we learn about wars, surrender means defeat. It means failure. It means that you are a doormat. And yet, on Sunday mornings, we come together and we sing songs like we just said moments ago. I surrender all. In our text today, we see Jesus to the point of desperation, beginning in verse 32. It says, he came to a place called Gethsemane, there on the Mount of Olives. This was a symbolic place. This wasn't just a passing through before Jesus would go to the cross. You see, Jesus had just gathered at the table with his disciples. He had washed the disciples' feet. He had predicted that someone was going to betray him. He knew that the cross was looming. And he goes to this place of Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, where in Zechariah chapter 14, it talks about this place as almost kind of a doomsday end times location. Scholars would call it eschatological, which means kind of apocalyptic of sorts. And it was a place that represented the pressing of olives, crushing to create oil. And so Jesus doesn't go to this place by accident, but instead, as he goes, he brings with him Peter, John, and James, the same three if you were here 2 weeks ago when Ryan talked about the transfiguration. Jesus had brought them up to the Mount of Transfiguration, and they watched Jesus, after talking about his death, be completely transformed into reflecting the glory of God. His clothes are dazzling. He is bright as a fire. And now he brings the disciples, and it says that he was deeply distressed and troubled in verse 33 through 34. Deeply distressed and troubled. The English language hardly has words to describe the emotion in the Greek language. There is a visceral reaction that Jesus is having here. It is beyond deeply distressed. He realizes he is utterly out of his depth, and he is completely and totally distressed. R.T. France, a New Testament scholar, says that this is a distress that words cannot even describe. He feels it from his gut, and he is groaning. And when you put this together with what just happened on the Mount Transfiguration to this moment, it gives us a theologically staggering image of what the incarnation means. That is, we see Jesus in glory, and we also see Jesus in weakness. We see Jesus in power and might, and we see Jesus in suffering and despair. Scott McKnight talks about that. What Jesus is facing here is not just a physical fear. He knows, yes, he's going to experience physical anguish, but it's more than this. He knows that he is about to absorb the failures and the sin and the brokenness of what the people of God did. That they could never live in the covenant with God as God called them to, but instead, over and over, they did not live as God's people. And so then we see him in this dread as he is trying to comprehend the call that he is supposed to live into. And Jesus then says, as he's praying, he starts to pray the Psalms. He says, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to the point of death." Jesus is not just improvising here, but this is a dark moment where he returns to the Psalms of lament. They have been so embedded in his heart and mind, and this is how he chooses to come vulnerably before God, to connect with God, because this is how he has been formed. And he brings forth this psalm of lament. And then in verse 35, we see that he collapses. He falls to the ground, his face in dirt, his hands covered in dirt. He collapses. And in Luke's gospel, he softens it a little. He says that he comes to his knees. But Mark likes to give us the full picture of what is really happening here. And Mark says that he collapsed, he fell, he went to the ground. I almost imagine him fully prostrate on the ground in that moment. He is so distraught that he is not performing anguish, but his body now is even struggling to stay upright. And he collapses and he falls to the ground. And as he falls to the ground, we see him comprehending how salvation history had been coming to this moment. Because he says in verse 36, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from you. Not what I will, but you will." There's 3 parts of this powerful prayer that are absolutely profound that we often miss. First of all, it's one of the rare and unique times that we see Jesus address God the Father as Abba. It's almost like a young child desperate for his daddy's embrace. It is an intimate, heart-to-heart moment. Jesus wants to be close to his Father. Jesus needs that communion in this moment. It's like an intimate language of a child that has really grown to know his Father and feel safe. And he says, "Abba, Father." It's as if this cup that he is about to receive will only be bearable because of the relationship and the communion with Abba, the Father. And then the second movement, he goes on to say, "Remove this cup from me." This cup has incredible symbolism in Scripture. You see, in the beginning of Scripture, in the story of God, we see God make a series of covenants, or expanding the covenant with them, where he promises that I will be your God and you will be my people. I will always be with you. I will never forsake you. And we see God expand these covenants throughout the Old Testament. And there's always a part that the people of God are to play. They're to live holy lives. They're to obey the law. They're to have no other gods. But over and over, we see humanity abandon their side of the covenant. And so we see psalmists and then prophets describe the covenant. We see this in Isaiah 51, Jeremiah 25, Psalm 75, that the cup, the symbol of a cup, is a concentrated judgment that will be poured out on humanity because of their covenant failure. And so prophets would talk about this cup, that this cup was a cup of judgment that would be poured out on all people. And now Jesus is not only comprehending the physical pain that he would endure, but he is now comprehending that this is a cup that he is to take on. It's not merely just his own death, but he understands that he is to take on the cup of judgment and absorb it. But we see this tender moment of him coming to Abba the Father. Abba, Father, am I really the one that is to take this cup? The cup of judgment, the cup of humanity's failures, sin and brokenness, division and war, hatred and betrayal. Am I really to absorb all of this? And then we see the third movement. An incredible pivot, almost seemingly like a hard pivot. The Greek word is Allah, or nevertheless, or yet. And so he moves from Abba to nevertheless. Not my will, but your will be done. And we see, though, that it's not that Jesus' will is obliterated, but instead it is surrendered and it is oriented and it is aligned. He is realigning his will to the will of God. Jesus is not disappearing. His desires are not in the background, but instead it is offered. It is surrendered. This is how Michael Gordon, a theologian, describes it as kenotic surrender, which means a self-emptying surrender. It's not a surrender that means defeat or failure, but instead it's the type of surrender where you are giving up your desires so that you can align those desires with the ways of God and so that God can rearrange and so that God can reorient them. And it's a costly, active, deliberate response. Abba, Allah, Abba, not my will. Abba, nevertheless. I know that there have been times in my life where I've experienced these moments, where we learned that surrender is not abstract, but instead, surrender is a self-emptying of taking whatever cup it is that God is calling us to take. And we see Jesus embody for us the type of surrender we are to have, which is very different than what those at the Battle of the Alamo believed surrender was. Surrender is not defeat. Surrender is not failure. Surrender is not even loss. Surrender is not even yourself or your will or your ways disappearing to the background. But instead, it's a rearrangement. And it's a realignment. And we see Jesus face down on the ground. And 3 different times, he comes back to the disciples. He sees them there sleeping. And the first time, he's so pastoral to them. He says, the flesh is so weak. And he gives them almost just grace. But then the third time he goes and he's distraught that the disciples are sleeping again. And so Jesus, he sees them sleeping and he says, enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go from here. And we see this foretaste, if you will, of Jesus who would die, but then he would rise. And we see this arc of Jesus face on the ground in complete and total agony, prays twice, God, Abba, can this cup from me pass? Do I really have to absorb the concentration of judgment because of Israel's failures? Do I really have to take this on? Allah, nevertheless, yet not my will, but yours be done. And then Mark is intentional by giving us this picture of Jesus then rising and moving forward, for the hour has come. I think about, again, many times in my life where this has been not just an idea, but it's been real. When I was called into ministry early on, I thought it was just going to be so easy. I thought that if you go into ministry, Pastor Greg, right, when we go into ministry, we think everybody's just going to love us so much. They're always just going to be so thankful, and they're going to agree with every decision that we make. And I learned early on that that actually is not the case. That it's not if you disappoint people, it's when. It's not if you have a parishioner in your office so angry at you, telling you that they are going to leave this church and that you as the pastor are wrecking this church. It's not if, but when a pastor gets an anonymous letter or note talking about your clothing, talking about the length of your sermon, making comments about your appearance, or whatever it is. By the way, I've made a new rule for myself. I will not read anonymous letters. But it's not if, but when, right? And very quickly on, in my younger years, my honeymoon phase, or my reality of what ministry would be like, diminished. And when I was in seminary, I really started to fall in love with academia. I thought, this is so great. I love studying everything I can about the Bible. I love writing. I love talking about it. I love the classroom. Maybe I could stop being a pastor and be a professor. That'll be much easier. Because truly, the best thing about ministry is the people, and the hardest thing about ministry is the people. And so I remember during that time where I was really asking and wrestling with God, God, can the cup of local church ministry from me pass? Could I instead just go get my PhD? And at the time, it was an exciting time. I was having the opportunity to TA for a professor. I was contributing journal articles. I was contributing to academic chapters. And so I thought everything was surely lining up, that this was going to be the path that God would have me on. And there was one evening, Jeff and I were at a worship service, and during the worship, they were doing a guided prayer time, and God gave me a very vivid vision. I had walked into a room, and I saw just a great bookshelf full of all my favorite books of incredible theologians. And I remember just getting so excited, like a kid in a candy store, and I thought, yes, God is going to let me do this. God is calling me to the academic world. And I started piling on books onto my arms, and I was just so excited. And I turned abruptly, and I see Jesus standing there. And I knew in that moment, as I got closer, I started to walk to Jesus. I had an armful of books. And I looked, and I saw Jesus holding this lamb that was the most beautiful lamb I had ever seen. I knew that it was a symbol of the family and the people of God. We are his sheep. And as Jesus was holding that lamb, something in me, something maternal leapt in me. It was just this maternal love, but then I looked down at all the books and I thought, but that's harder. And in that moment, I put all the books down. And Jesus in this vision had just handed me this lamb, and I knew this was the cup. This was the cup that God was calling me to bear. What are the cups that you circle throughout your life? What are the cups that you avoid? Maybe you keep circling it keeps showing up. Is it the relationship that has been unresolved for far too long? That you've been avoiding dealing with that and you don't want to hold that cup? Is it the cup of sobriety? Maybe you've been avoiding it, you've been running from it, you are afraid that if you go down that sobriety path that you will be filled with emptiness, and pain, and have to face your demons? Is it the pattern of dishonesty and God is calling you to take on the cup of honesty? Is it the apology that still has been left unsaid? Is it the forgiveness that you need to give someone? I remember another cup, a very personal one. Growing up, there was someone in my family that was physically abusive to me and emotionally abusive. To the point that years later, I spent hours and hours and money in trauma therapy, working through all of that. And even after the years of therapy, there was something in me that still wanted to be resentful and angry and bitter. Somehow that if I just kept on hating this person, it would punish them. And whenever I would be around this family member, I would somehow revert back to like a 17-year-old bratty teenager, angry all the time. And as years went on, the Lord began to speak over me through spiritual directors, through therapists. Tara Beth, do you want to be well? Because somehow for me, forgiving that person meant retreating. Forgiving that person meant surrender and failure. After all, I was the one that was abused. After all, I was the one that had complex traumatic disorder now, not them. So I felt as though I had to stay angry. But the Lord kept speaking over me, Tara Beth, do you want to be well? And over time, God took me from the dirt, and I took that cup of forgiveness. And it wasn't a defeat, but instead it was a rising. My friends, when we take those cups that we are avoiding to take on, the cup of forgiveness, the cup of freedom, the cup of relational wholeness, that self-emptying, kenotic kind of surrender, when we do that, we don't stay on the dirt on our face, but instead we can trust in Abba, that Abba is there to bring us from the ground to the rising. And that what we think the cup of suffering is only the point. Instead, it brings us to a new place of freedom. It brings us to a new place of wholeness. It brings us to a new place of salvation. May we discover the dirt and the dust to the rising. May we discover the cup to the resurrection. Next Sunday is Palm Sunday. And we're going to continue to sit in this place over the next week and a half of the cup that Jesus took on. And next week, we're going to wave those palm branches, Hosanna, Hosanna, as we watch, knowing full well that cup that he is taking on. And we will go through Friday, and we will discover the journey from the dirt and the dust to the crying out of Abba to the rising again.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran, and our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.